The seminar concluded earlier than anticipated, leaving me with an extra day to myself. Instead of lounging around in the hotel, I decided to seize the opportunity and surprise Polly. As I packed my bags in the hotel room, a sense of giddy anticipation began to build. I could already see the look of surprise on her face when I walked through the front door a day earlier than planned. I picked up the phone and dialed Polly's number. She answered on the second ring. "Hey, sweetie," she greeted me, her voice bright and cheerful. "Hey, Polly. The seminar wrapped up early, but unfortunately, I couldn't get my flight rescheduled. I'll still be back Tuesday evening," I lied, hoping to maintain the surprise. "Aw, that's too bad," she replied with a hint of disappointment. "I was looking forward to seeing you." "Me too, but at least it's just one more night apart. I'll call you when I land on Tuesday," I said, trying to mask my excitement. "Okay, I'll be at the airport to pick you up around 6. Drive safe and hurry back. I miss you." "I miss you too, Polly. Talk to you soon." Hanging up the phone, I felt a surge of exhilaration. Keeping the surprise under wraps added to the thrill. I checked out of the hotel and made my way to the airport, my mind racing with the possibilities of how the evening would unfold. At the airport, I approached the ticket desk. The young woman behind the counter looked up and smiled. "Good afternoon. How can I help you today?" she asked. "I'm hoping to catch an earlier flight. My seminar ended ahead of schedule," I explained, handing her my ticket. "Let me see what we have available," she said, tapping away at her keyboard. After a moment, she looked up, her smile widening. "You're in luck. There's a flight to a nearby airport leaving in about half an hour. It's a bit of a drive from there to your destination, but you'll be home much earlier." "That sounds perfect," I replied. "I'll take it." With my new boarding pass in hand, I made my way through security and to the gate. I barely had time to sit down before they called my group to board. As I settled into my seat, I couldn't help but grin. Everything was falling into place perfectly. The flight was uneventful, giving me plenty of time to daydream about Polly's reaction. I imagined her eyes lighting up with surprise and joy, her arms wrapping around me in a warm embrace. The thought made the hours pass quickly. Upon landing, I hurried to the car rental counter. The attendant, a middle-aged man with a friendly demeanor, processed my request efficiently. "Heading somewhere special?" he asked as he handed me the keys. "Yeah, surprising my wife," I replied with a grin. "Good luck then. Drive safe and have a great time." "Thanks, I will." The drive home was scenic and serene, but my mind was far from calm. I replayed different scenarios in my head, each one more delightful than the last. The closer I got to home, the more my anticipation grew. The familiar landmarks passed by, and finally, I turned onto our street. My heart pounded in my chest as I pulled into the driveway. The house was dark, which was a bit unusual, but it added to the surprise. I parked the car and quietly approached the front door, fumbling with my keys in the darkness. Once inside, I set my bag down gently and called out, "Polly, are you home?" There was no response. I moved through the living room and into the kitchen, flipping on the light. Everything was in its place, but the house felt eerily empty. Just as I was about to dial Polly's cell, I heard the faint hum of an engine. I peeked out the window and saw her car pulling into the driveway. My heart raced again, and I positioned myself near the front door, ready to spring the surprise. The front door opened, and Polly stepped inside, looking tired but content. She froze when she saw me, her eyes wide with shock. "Nathan, what are you doing here?" she exclaimed, dropping her purse on the floor. "Surprise," I said, stepping forward to hug her. "I finished early and caught an earlier flight. I wanted to surprise you." She laughed, a mix of joy and disbelief in her voice. "I can't believe it. You really got me. I was just at a friend's place. I thought I had another night to myself." "Well, now we have an extra evening together," I said, pulling her close. "I missed you." "I missed you too, Nathan. This is the best surprise ever." We spent the next hour catching up, the initial shock giving way to a warm, comfortable evening. As we settled on the couch, Polly resting her head on my shoulder, I felt a deep sense of contentment. The surprise had been worth every moment of planning and anticipation. The drive home from the airport had been long but filled with the anticipation of seeing Polly's delighted face when she saw me a day earlier than expected. I imagined her surprise, her eyes lighting up as she threw her arms around me. But as I turned onto our street, the scene awaiting me was far from what I had pictured. The house was shrouded in darkness, an unusual sight for this time of night. Polly's car was nowhere to be seen. My heart sank, and a sense of unease crept over me. I parked the car and quietly let myself in, the house eerily silent. The air felt heavy, as if it were holding secrets that I was about to uncover. I walked through the living room, flipping on lights as I went. Everything appeared to be in order, but the emptiness gnawed at me. Where could she be? I reached for my phone and dialed her number. After a few rings, she answered, her voice heavy with sleep. "Hey, Polly, it's me," I said, trying to keep my voice light and casual. "I just wanted to check in." "Nathan," she replied, sounding disoriented. "Why are you calling so late?" I was asleep. "Sorry to wake you," I lied, "but I couldn't reach you on the house phone. Is everything okay?" "Yeah, everything's fine," she said with a yawn. "The landline's been acting up. I'm in bed, Nathan." "What's going on?" I paused, my mind racing. If she was in bed, why wasn't she here? I decided to probe further. "Where exactly are you? I can't hear any background noise." "In bed, Nathan," she repeated, a touch of irritation in her voice. "Where else would I be at this hour?" I swallowed my doubts, forcing a chuckle. "I guess I'm just paranoid. Well, don't worry about picking me up tomorrow. My plans change. I won't be needing that ride after all." "Oh," she said, sounding more awake now. "What do you mean? Where are you?" "Just a change of plans," I said evasively. "I'll keep you posted." There was a brief silence. Then Polly's tone softened. "I miss you, Nathan. Hurry home, okay?" "I will," I replied, my heart heavy with suspicion. "Sweet dreams, Polly." After hanging up, I stood in the middle of the living room, grappling with a swirl of emotions. Something was off, and I couldn't shake the feeling that Polly was hiding something from me. Deciding not to jump to conclusions, I made my way upstairs, checking our bedroom. The bed was neatly made, untouched since I left. My unease grew as I checked the other rooms, each one empty and quiet. It was as if Polly hadn't been home at all. I dialed the landline again, and this time it rang without issue. I hung up quickly, realizing she had lied. My mind raced with possibilities, each one more unsettling than the last. Where could she be, and why had she lied about being in bed? I moved back downstairs, determined to find answers. The house, which once felt warm and inviting, now seemed like a labyrinth of shadows and unanswered questions. I opened the garage door and found it empty, confirming that Polly's car was indeed gone. Returning to the living room, I sank into a chair, trying to make sense of it all. My instincts told me something was wrong, and I couldn't ignore the nagging feeling that Polly was hiding something significant. I resolved to uncover the truth, no matter how painful it might be. The following morning, I woke up early, my mind still clouded with doubt. I discreetly moved the rental car to a spot where it wouldn't be seen from the house and waited. Around 7 a.m., I saw Polly's car pull into the driveway, accompanied by a male passenger. My heart pounded as I ducked into a nearby closet, leaving the door slightly ajar. Through the narrow opening, I saw Polly and the man step out of the car. They were talking and laughing, completely unaware of my presence. My stomach churned as I strained to hear their conversation. "I'll just change and head to work," Polly said, her voice casual. "I'll grab some clothes for tomorrow to save us a trip back in the morning." "I'd lend a hand," the man replied with a chuckle, "but then I'd be responsible for getting you back into bed." Polly laughed, a sound that used to bring me joy but now felt like a knife twisting in my gut. "And then I'd have to fire you for being late," she teased. "I doubt you'd have the heart to fire me," he said, his tone playful. "You seem to enjoy having me under you too much." My breath caught in my throat. The reality of the situation hit me like a tidal wave. Polly was having an affair, and her lover was none other than her new boss. "You better get inside before anyone sees us," Polly said, glancing around. "I'll be back in 10. He kissed her briefly, then watched as she walked toward the house. I stayed hidden, my heart pounding in my ears. This wasn't the homecoming I had imagined, but it was the harsh reality I now had to face. As Polly moved through the house, I made my decision. I couldn't let this betrayal go unaddressed. The surprise I had planned had turned into a nightmare, and I was determined to get to the bottom of it, no matter the cost. The morning light seeped through the blinds, casting a pale glow across the bedroom. I hadn't slept much. My mind had been racing all night, grappling with the unsettling discoveries of the previous evening. The quiet house felt like a foreign land, filled with secrets and shadows. As I lay there, staring at the ceiling, a steely determination took root. Today, I would uncover the truth. Rising from the bed, I moved silently, careful not to make a sound that might alert Polly to my presence. I crept downstairs and peered out the window. The street was still, the early hour ensuring most of the neighbors were still asleep. I slipped outside and discreetly moved the rental car to a spot a few houses down, where it would be hidden from view. The last thing I needed was for Polly or her lover to see it and realize I was home. Returning to the house, I found a vantage point near the front window, partially concealed by the heavy drapes. My heart pounded as I waited. After what felt like an eternity, I saw Polly's car approaching. It pulled into the driveway, and my breath caught in my throat. A man was sitting beside her, casually chatting as if he belonged there. Polly stepped out first, her movements quick and purposeful. The man followed, and my stomach churned as I recognized him. It was Josh, her new boss. I watched them through the narrow opening, straining to hear their conversation. "I'll just change and head to work," Polly said, her voice carrying a casual, almost affectionate tone. "I'll grab some clothes for tomorrow to save us a trip back in the morning." "I'd lend a hand," Josh replied with a chuckle, "but then I'd be responsible for getting you back into bed." Polly laughed, a sound that once brought me joy but now filled me with a seething anger. "And then I'd have to fire you for being late," she teased, her tone light and flirtatious. Josh stepped closer to her, his voice lowering to a murmur. "I doubt you'd have the heart to fire me. You seem to enjoy having me under you too much." The words hit me like a punch to the gut. I had suspected infidelity, but hearing it confirmed was a different kind of pain. I clenched my fists, fighting the urge to storm out and confront them then and there. Instead, I stayed hidden, forcing myself to remain calm and think clearly. Polly glanced around, her eyes scanning the street. "You better get inside before anyone sees us," she said, her voice tinged with urgency. "I'll be back in 10. Josh leaned in and kissed her briefly, a gesture that seemed routine, as if they'd done it countless times before. My blood boiled, but I stayed rooted in my spot, determined not to reveal myself yet. Polly headed toward the house, and I slipped deeper into the shadows, watching as she entered. My mind raced with thoughts of betrayal and heartbreak, but amidst the turmoil, a plan began to form. I couldn't confront them without evidence, and I needed to understand the full extent of their relationship. I decided to follow Polly to her workplace, to see for myself how deep this affair ran. As soon as Polly disappeared upstairs, I crept out of my hiding spot and made my way to the garage. I waited until I heard her footsteps moving through the house, then slipped out the side door and walked down the street to the rental car. I would follow her discreetly, gather the information I needed, and then decide my next move. The drive to Polly's office was tense. I stayed several cars behind, careful not to get too close. When we arrived, I parked a few blocks away and walked to her building, my heart pounding with a mix of dread and determination. I found a coffee shop across the street where I could keep an eye on the entrance. Minutes turned into hours as I watched Polly and Josh interact through the large windows of their office. Their body language spoke volumes, filled with stolen glances and subtle touches. It was clear their affair was not just a fleeting dalliance, but something deeper and more insidious. I snapped a few photos with my phone, documenting their interactions. The weight of my discovery settled heavily on my shoulders, but it also fueled my resolve. Polly had betrayed our marriage, and I needed to confront her with the undeniable truth. As the day wore on, I formulated my plan. I would gather more evidence, confront Polly, and decide the future of our relationship based on her response. The road ahead would be painful, but it was a necessary journey. Betrayal had shattered my trust, but it had also awakened a strength within me that I hadn't known existed. By the time Polly and Josh left the office, I was ready. I followed them back home, keeping my distance. When they parted ways and Polly returned to the house, I waited a few minutes before heading inside. She was in the kitchen, making a pot of coffee, her demeanor calm and collected. "Nathan," she exclaimed, genuinely surprised to see me. "What are you doing here? I thought you weren't coming home until tomorrow." I took a deep breath, steadying myself. "Plans changed," I said, my voice controlled and even. "We need to talk, Polly." She looked at me, her eyes widening with concern. "What's going on?" "I know about you and Josh," I said, my words cutting through the air like a knife. Her face paled, and she took a step back. "Nathan, I can explain." "Save it," I interrupted, holding up a hand. "I've seen enough. We'll talk, but not now. I need some time to process this." Polly's eyes filled with tears, but I turned away, the weight of her betrayal heavy on my heart. As I walked upstairs, I realized that the path ahead would be difficult, but I was ready to face it head-on. The truth had been unearthed, and now it was time to deal with the consequences. Sitting alone in my study, I stared at the blank notepad in front of me, my mind swirling with a mix of anger and determination. Confronting Polly and Josh privately wouldn't be enough. They needed to face the consequences of their betrayal publicly, in front of the people they cared about. I knew it was a drastic step, but it felt necessary. With a deep breath, I picked up the phone and began to set my plan in motion. First, I dialed the number I had found for Josh's wife in Houston. My hands trembled slightly as I listened to the phone ring, but I steeled myself, knowing that this was a critical part of my plan. "Hello, Mrs. Perry," I said when a woman's voice answered. "Yes, this is she." "Who's calling?" Her tone was polite but cautious. "This is Nathan Green from Halifax Company." I lied smoothly, forcing a cheerfulness into my voice that I didn't feel. "We're organizing a surprise welcome party for your husband, Josh, and we'd love for you to join us. We'll cover the travel expenses, of course." There was a brief pause on the other end of the line. "A surprise party? That sounds lovely, but I'd have to arrange for someone to watch the children." "I understand. The party is tomorrow evening. If you can catch flight 1435 on American, we'll have someone pick you up from the airport. The company will reimburse you through Josh's paycheck," I continued, my words flowing more easily now. "That sounds wonderful. I'll make the arrangements," she replied, her voice warming with excitement. "Josh will be so surprised." "Great, just remember, it's a surprise, so keep it under wraps," I added. "Of course. Thank you so much for organizing this. I can't wait to see Josh," she said, her happiness palpable. After hanging up, I sat back in my chair, a strange mix of satisfaction and guilt washing over me. I hated deceiving her, but it was a necessary part of the plan. Next, I turned my attention to Polly's friends and relatives. I crafted a similar story, telling them that Polly was being honored at work and that I wanted to throw a surprise celebration for her. One by one, they agreed to come, their enthusiasm and support evident in their voices. "Hello, Susan. It's Nathan," I said, calling one of Polly's closest friends. I'm organizing a surprise celebration for Polly. She's getting a raise, and I thought it would be nice to have her friends and family there." "Oh, that's wonderful," Susan exclaimed. "Polly will be so thrilled. When is it?" "Tomorrow evening at 7 p.m. at our house," I replied. "It's a surprise, so please keep it a secret." "Absolutely. I'll be there," Susan promised. As I made call after call, the pieces of my plan began to fall into place. By the end of the day, I had confirmed the attendance of Polly's closest friends, a few relatives, and Josh's unsuspecting wife. They all believed they were coming to celebrate a joyous occasion, but the truth would soon be revealed. The next morning, I made final preparations. I hired a caterer to ensure the food and drinks were ready, and I arranged for a few extra decorations to give the illusion of a real celebration. Every detail had to be perfect to maintain the facade until the right moment. By late afternoon, our house was transformed. The living room was decorated with streamers and balloons, and a large banner that read "Congratulations, Polly" hung prominently. The smell of delicious food filled the air, masking the bitterness I felt inside. Guests began to arrive around 7 p.m., each one greeted with a smile and a warm welcome. I played the part of the proud husband, thanking them for coming and encouraging them to enjoy the food and drinks. "Nathan, this is such a wonderful idea," Polly's sister, Emily, said as she hugged me. "Polly is going to be so surprised." "I hope so," I replied, forcing a smile. "She deserves it." As 8 p.m. approached, I kept a watchful eye on the driveway. Finally, I saw Polly's car pull in, followed closely by Josh's wife's rental car. My heart pounded as I moved to switch off the deck lights and retreated behind the heavy drapes, ready to set the final part of my plan into motion. Polly walked in first, her face lighting up with genuine surprise as she saw the gathered crowd. "What's all this?" she asked, her eyes wide with delight. "Surprise!" everyone shouted in unison. "Oh my gosh, Nathan, this is amazing!" Polly exclaimed, turning to look for me. "Where are you?" I stepped out from behind the drapes, forcing a broad smile. "Right here, sweetheart. Congratulations on your raise." Josh walked in behind her, a puzzled look on his face. "What's going on?" he asked, scanning the room. Before Polly could respond, the front door opened again, and Mrs. Perry walked in. "Josh," she called out, her face beaming with happiness. The room fell silent as Josh's eyes widened in shock. Polly's smile faded, replaced by a look of confusion and fear. "Nathan, what's going on?" she whispered, her voice trembling. "I think it's time we all had a little talk," I said, my voice calm but firm. "Everyone, please have a seat. Polly, Josh, you too." As everyone settled into their seats, I stood at the front of the room, my heart pounding with a mix of anger and satisfaction. The moment of truth had arrived, and there was no turning back now. The morning sun had barely risen when I left the house, the day's events replaying in my mind. I drove to the airport, my thoughts a tangled web of anger, betrayal, and determination. Picking up Mrs. Perry was the first step in my plan, a necessary deception that would set the stage for the evening's revelations. As I arrived at the airport, I parked the car and headed inside, scanning the arrivals board for Flight 1435 from Houston. My heart pounded in my chest, each beat a reminder of the confrontation that awaited me. I found a seat near the baggage claim and waited, rehearsing my story in my head. When the passengers from Houston began to filter into the baggage area, I stood up and approached a few unaccompanied women, inquiring if they were Mrs. Perry. After a couple of mistaken attempts, I finally heard a voice call out to me. "Hello, I'm Mrs. Perry," she declared, her voice confident yet warm. "Are you here to pick me up?" I turned to see a woman in her mid-40s, her striking appearance reminiscent of a Hollywood starlet. She exuded a sense of grace and poise that momentarily took me aback. I gathered myself quickly, remembering the part I had to play. "Yes, I am," I replied, offering a friendly smile. "Welcome to Springfield. I'm Nathan, Polly's husband. "Thank you so much for coming on such short notice." "It's no problem at all," she said, her eyes twinkling with curiosity. "This surprise party sounds wonderful. Josh will be thrilled." As we walked to the car, I continued to weave my story. We're having an outdoor party for Josh and Polly. It's a combined celebration for his new position and her recent promotion. I thought it would be a great way to bring everyone together and make them feel appreciated. Mrs. Perry smiled warmly. "That's very thoughtful of you. Josh has been working so hard, and I know he'll appreciate the gesture. Polly must be a remarkable woman to deserve such a celebration." I nodded, forcing another smile. "She certainly is." The drive to our house was filled with polite conversation, Mrs. Perry sharing anecdotes about her life in Houston and her excitement for the move to Springfield. I listened, responding with the appropriate level of interest, all the while feeling the weight of the evening's impending confrontation pressing down on me. When we arrived at the house, the caterers were already busy setting up. The scent of grilled meats and freshly baked bread wafted through the air, mingling with the floral fragrance of the decorations. Colorful streamers and balloons adorned the yard, and a large banner that read, "Congratulations, Polly and Josh," hung prominently above the deck. As guests began to arrive, I moved through the crowd, greeting each person with a warm handshake or a hug, thanking them for coming and encouraging them to enjoy the food and drinks. The caterers did an excellent job of keeping everyone fed and happy, their efficiency a small comfort amidst my growing anxiety. "Nathan, this is such a wonderful idea," Susan said, giving me a tight hug. "Polly is going to be so surprised." "I hope so," I replied, forcing a smile. "She deserves it." By 7:30 p.m., the house was filled with the sounds of laughter and conversation. Polly's friends and relatives mingled with Josh's colleagues, everyone enjoying the festive atmosphere, completely unaware of the storm brewing beneath the surface. I stole a glance at Mrs. Perry, who was engaged in a lively conversation with one of Polly's aunts. She seemed genuinely happy, oblivious to the true reason for the gathering. Guilt gnawed at me, but I pushed it aside, reminding myself that this was necessary. As 8 p.m. approached, my heart raced with anticipation. I kept a watchful eye on the driveway, waiting for Polly and Josh to arrive. Finally, I saw Polly's car pull in, followed closely by a rental car that I knew belonged to Mrs. Perry. "Nathan, they're here," Susan whispered excitedly, grabbing my arm. "Get ready to shout surprise." Polly walked in first, her face lighting up with genuine surprise as she saw the gathered crowd. "What's all this?" she asked, her eyes wide with delight. "Surprise," everyone shouted in unison. "Oh my gosh, Nathan, this is amazing," Polly exclaimed, turning to look for me. "Where are you?" I stepped out from the crowd, forcing a broad smile. "Right here, sweetheart. Congratulations on your promotion." Josh walked in behind her, a puzzled look on his face. "What's going on?" he asked, scanning the room. Before Polly could respond, the front door opened again, and Mrs. Perry walked in. "Josh," she called out, her face beaming with happiness. The room fell silent as Josh's eyes widened in shock. Polly's smile faded, replaced by a look of confusion and fear. "Nathan, what's going on?" she whispered, her voice trembling. "I think it's time we all had a little talk," I said, my voice calm but firm. "Everyone, please have a seat. Polly, Josh, you too." As everyone settled into their seats, I stood at the front of the room, my heart pounding with a mix of anger and satisfaction. The moment of truth had arrived, and there was no turning back now. Polly's eyes darted around the room, her confusion turning to panic. "Nathan, what is this about?" I took a deep breath, steadying myself. "Polly, Josh, and everyone else, thank you for coming tonight. I've gathered you all here because there are some things that need to be addressed, things that have been hidden for far too long." Josh shifted uncomfortably in his seat, his eyes flickering towards Mrs. Perry, who looked equally puzzled. "What are you talking about, Nathan?" I locked eyes with Polly, the betrayal still fresh in my mind. Polly, I know about you and Josh. I know about the affair. A collective gasp rippled through the room as Polly's face turned ghostly pale. She opened her mouth to speak, but no words came out. Josh looked like he'd been punched in the gut, his eyes wide with shock and fear. Mrs. Perry stood up, her face a mask of confusion and hurt. Josh, is this true? Josh stammered, unable to meet her gaze. I can explain. There's no need for explanations, I interjected, my voice steady. The truth is out now, and everyone deserves to know. The room was silent, the weight of the revelation hanging heavy in the air. Polly's eyes filled with tears, her hands trembling. Nathan, please. I shook my head, feeling a strange mix of relief and sorrow. I trusted you, Polly. I loved you. But you betrayed that trust. Turning to the guests, I continued, I'm sorry you all had to find out this way. But I couldn't let the lies continue. Polly and Josh's affair has been going on for months, and it's time for the truth to come out. Mrs. Perry's eyes hardened as she looked at Josh. How could you do this to me, to our family? Josh hung his head, unable to respond. Polly sobbed quietly, her shoulders shaking. Nathan, I'm so sorry. I never meant for it to go this far. I felt a pang of sadness, but knew there was no going back. It's too late for apologies, Polly. The damage is done. As the reality of the situation sank in, the guests began to murmur among themselves, the atmosphere shifting from one of celebration to one of shock and disbelief. Nathan, what are you going to do? Susan asked softly, her eyes filled with concern. I took a deep breath, feeling the weight of my decision. I'm moving on. Polly and I are over. With those words, I turned and walked out of the room, leaving behind the echoes of betrayal and the start of a new chapter in my life. As the last sliver of daylight faded, casting long shadows across the yard, I kept my eyes fixed on the driveway. Any moment now, Polly and Josh would arrive, completely unaware of the trap they were walking into. My heart pounded with a mix of anticipation and dread. Despite the crowd mingling around me, chatting and laughing, I felt isolated, my focus entirely on the imminent confrontation. Finally, I saw the headlights of Polly's car turn into the driveway. I took a deep breath, steadying myself, and moved toward the front door. The murmur of conversations faded into the background as I positioned myself by the entrance, rehearsing my lines one last time. The door opened, and Polly walked in first, her eyes widening in surprise at the sight of the gathered crowd. Nathan, what's all this? She asked, a genuine smile lighting up her face. Surprise. The guests shouted in unison, their voices echoing through the house. Josh followed closely behind her, his expression one of puzzlement. What's going on? He asked, looking around the room. I stepped forward, forcing a broad smile. Welcome home, Polly. We're celebrating your promotion, I said, my voice steady despite the turmoil inside me. And Josh, we thought it'd be nice to welcome you to Springfield properly. Polly glanced at Josh, then back at me, her smile faltering slightly. Nathan, this is so thoughtful. Thank you. Before I could respond, the front door opened again, and Mrs. Perry walked in. Josh, she called out, her face a mixture of happiness and confusion. The room fell silent. Josh's eyes widened in shock, his face draining of color. Polly's smile disappeared, replaced by a look of panic and confusion. Nathan, what's going on? She whispered, her voice trembling. I took a deep breath, feeling a strange mix of satisfaction and sorrow. Everyone, please have a seat, I said, my voice carrying through the room. Polly, Josh, you too. As the guests settled into their seats, murmurs of confusion rippling through the crowd, I positioned myself in front of them. Polly and Josh remained standing, their faces masks of apprehension and dread. Polly, I began, locking eyes with her. I know about you and Josh. I know about the affair. A collective gasp echoed through the room. Polly's face turned ghostly pale, her eyes welling with tears. She opened her mouth to speak, but no words came out. Josh looked like he'd been struck, his eyes wide with shock and fear. Mrs. Perry stepped forward, her voice trembling with anger. "Josh, is this true? Have you been having an affair?" Josh stammered, unable to meet her gaze. I can explain." "There's no need for explanations," I interjected, my voice calm but firm. "The truth is out now." Polly's eyes darted around the room, her confusion turning to panic. "Nathan, please." I shook my head, my heart aching. "I trusted you, Polly. I loved you. But you betrayed that trust." Turning to the guests, I continued, "I'm sorry you all had to find out this way. But I couldn't let the lies continue. Polly and Josh's affair has been going on for months, and it's time for the truth to come out." Mrs. Perry's eyes hardened as she looked at Josh. "How could you do this to me, to our family?" Josh hung his head, unable to respond. Polly sobbed quietly, her shoulders shaking. "Nathan, I'm so sorry. I never meant for it to go this far." I felt a pang of sadness, but knew there was no going back. "It's too late for apologies, Polly. The damage is done." As the reality of the situation sank in, the guests began to murmur among themselves, the atmosphere shifting from one of celebration to one of shock and disbelief. "Nathan, what are you going to do?" Susan asked softly, her eyes filled with concern. I took a deep breath, feeling the weight of my decision. "I'm moving on. Polly and I are over." With those words, I turned and walked to the deck. The cool night air washed over me as I flicked on the deck lights, revealing the crowd of onlookers. Faces of friends and family stared back at me, their expressions a mix of shock, pity, and curiosity. Polly followed me out, her face streaked with tears. "Nathan, please, we can work this out," she pleaded, her voice desperate. I shook my head, feeling a strange sense of calm. "No, Polly, we can't. You've broken my trust, and there's no fixing that." Josh stood frozen in the doorway, his face a mask of regret. Mrs. Perry walked up to him, her eyes blazing with anger. "We're done, Josh. I'm taking the kids and going back to Houston." Josh's shoulders slumped, his defeat evident. "I'm sorry, Karen. I've made a terrible mistake." "Sorry won't fix this," she snapped, turning away from him. "You've destroyed our family." Polly sank to her knees, her sobs echoing in the night air. "Nathan, please don't leave me," she begged. I looked down at her, my heart heavy with sorrow. "I'm sorry, Polly. It's over." As the guests began to disperse, whispering among themselves, I walked back inside the house. The decorations and food that once seemed so festive now felt like remnants of a broken dream. I sat down, feeling the weight of the evening's events settle over me. Susan approached, her face filled with sympathy. "Nathan, if you need anything, we're here for you." I nodded, grateful for her support. "Thank you, Susan. I appreciate it." As the last of the guests left, I stood up, taking one last look around the house that had once been filled with love and happiness. Now it felt like a shell, empty and hollow. I turned off the lights and walked out, leaving behind the echoes of betrayal and the start of a new chapter in my life. The chaotic scene that followed the revelation was both satisfying and heart-wrenching. The living room, once a place of warmth and love, now felt like a battlefield littered with emotional shrapnel. Polly, her face a mask of anguish, tried to speak, but the words caught in her throat. Her tears streamed unchecked, carving tracks down her cheeks as she looked at me with desperate eyes. "Nathan, please, let me explain," she begged, her voice breaking. I shook my head, the anger and hurt swirling within me. "Explain what, Polly?" "That you've been lying to me for months. That you've been sneaking around behind my back with him." I pointed at Josh, who stood awkwardly, avoiding my gaze. Josh's wife, Karen, stepped forward, her face flushed with fury. "How could you, Josh? How could you betray our family like this? Her voice trembled with a mix of rage and heartbreak. Josh raised his hands in a futile gesture of defense. Karen, save it. Karen's voice cut through his excuses like a knife. I don't want to hear it. You've destroyed everything. As their argument spilled out in front of everyone, Polly retreated, her sobs echoing down the hallway as she fled to the bathroom. The door slammed shut behind her, leaving me alone to face the aftermath. The guests, once animated and cheerful, now stood in stunned silence, their faces a mix of sympathy and shock. Susan, a close friend and neighbor, approached me, her eyes filled with concern. Nathan, are you okay? I took a deep breath, feeling a strange sense of relief and empowerment. For the first time in months, I felt like I had taken control of my life. I'll be fine, Susan. Thank you. She placed a comforting hand on my shoulder. If you need anything, we're all here for you. I nodded, grateful for her support. I appreciate it. One by one, the guests began to leave, offering quiet words of sympathy and support as they filed out the door. As the last of them departed, the house fell into an uneasy silence. I stood alone in the living room, surrounded by the remnants of the party, a stark contrast to the turmoil that had unfolded. Karen, still seething with anger, walked over to Josh, who had been standing silently, his head hung low. We're done, Josh. I'm taking the kids and going back to Houston. Josh reached out, his voice pleading. Karen, please, let's talk about this. I made a mistake. Too little, too late, she snapped, pulling away from his grasp. You've destroyed our family. There's nothing left to talk about. With a final, scornful look, she turned and left, leaving Josh standing there, a picture of defeat. He turned to me, his expression a mix of regret and desperation. Nathan, I'm sorry. I never meant for this to happen. I met his gaze, my anger bubbling to the surface. Sorry doesn't cut it, Josh. You've ruined 2 marriages tonight. There's no coming back from this. He nodded, his shoulders slumping. I know. I'll pack my things and be gone by tomorrow. As he turned to leave, I felt a wave of exhaustion wash over me. The adrenaline that had fueled me through the confrontation was fading, leaving me drained. I walked over to the bathroom door and knocked softly. Polly, come out. We need to talk. There was a long pause before the door creaked open. Polly emerged, her eyes red and puffy, her face a mask of sorrow. Nathan, I'm so sorry, she whispered, her voice barely audible. I sighed, feeling a mix of sadness and resolve. I know, Polly, but sorry isn't enough. You've broken my trust, and I don't think we can fix this. She nodded, tears spilling down her cheeks. I understand. I'll pack my things and leave. As she turned to walk away, I felt a pang of sadness. Despite everything, I had loved her deeply, and seeing her like this was painful, but I knew it was necessary. The damage was done, and there was no going back. That night, I sat alone in the living room, the house eerily quiet around me. Despite the heartbreak and betrayal, I felt a sense of closure. The truth was out, and I had taken control of my life again. As I stared at the darkened room, I realized that this was the beginning of a new chapter, one where I could rebuild and move forward, freed from the lies and deceit that had plagued me for so long. The following morning, Polly and Josh were gone. The house felt strangely empty, but also lighter. I walked through the rooms, taking in the silence. It was a new beginning, and despite the pain, I felt hopeful for the future. I picked up my phone and called Susan. Hey, it's Nathan. Do you think you could come over? I could use some company. Of course, Nathan. I'll be right there, she replied, her voice filled with warmth and reassurance. As I hung up, I took a deep breath, feeling a sense of peace settle over me. The worst was over, and I was ready to start anew. In the days following the confrontation, I felt like I was moving through a fog, my emotions a tangled mess of anger, sadness, and relief. Polly and I had one last heated discussion, filled with accusations and regret, but it was clear that our marriage was beyond repair. "I can't believe you did this to us, Polly," I said, pacing the living room, my voice trembling with frustration. 17 years, and this is how it ends." Polly sat on the couch, her face buried in her hands. "I never meant to hurt you, Nathan." I don't know what I was thinking. I stopped and faced her, the pain in my chest almost unbearable. "That's the problem, Polly. You weren't thinking about us. You were only thinking about yourself." She looked up, her eyes red and swollen. "I know. I'm sorry. I'm so sorry." "Sorry isn't enough," I replied, my voice softening. "We can't go back. Too much has happened." We both knew the truth, even if it hurt to admit it. Our marriage was over. The following day, I packed my belongings and moved out, finding a modest apartment downtown. The first night in my new place was the hardest. The solitude was daunting, the silence oppressive. I lay awake, staring at the ceiling, my mind racing with thoughts of what could have been. But gradually, as the days turned into weeks, I began to adjust to my new reality. The peace and freedom that came with being alone were unexpected, but welcome. I found solace in the simplicity of my new surroundings. One evening, I decided to take a walk through my new neighborhood, hoping the fresh air would clear my mind. As I strolled down the quiet streets, I felt a strange sense of liberation. I was no longer tied to the past, no longer bound by the lies and deceit that had plagued my marriage. The next day, I ran into Susan at the grocery store. She smiled warmly when she saw me. "Nathan, how are you holding up?" I managed a small smile. "I'm getting by. It's been a lot to process." She nodded sympathetically. "I can imagine. If you ever need to talk, I'm here." "Thanks, Susan. I appreciate it," I said, feeling a flicker of gratitude. As the days went by, I threw myself into my work, finding a sense of purpose and distraction in my sales career. The busier I stayed, the less time I had to dwell on the past. I began to explore new hobbies, trying my hand at cooking, and even taking up painting. The creative outlet provided a much-needed escape, allowing me to express my emotions in a way that words couldn't. One Saturday afternoon, I decided to visit a local art gallery. As I wandered through the exhibits, I felt a sense of calm wash over me. The vibrant colors and intricate designs reminded me that beauty could still be found, even in the midst of chaos. I struck up a conversation with one of the artists, a woman named Laura. She was friendly and insightful, and we talked about art and life for what felt like hours. "Nathan, you have a good eye for detail," she said, smiling. "Have you ever considered taking an art class?" I chuckled. "I'm not sure I'm ready for that, but I'll think about it." As I left the gallery, I felt a renewed sense of hope. The pain of the past was still there, but it was slowly being overshadowed by the possibilities of the future. I realized that I was beginning to heal, to find myself again. Back at my apartment, I started a new painting, letting the colors and shapes flow freely. It wasn't perfect, but it was mine, a symbol of my journey towards healing and self-discovery. That evening, I sat on my balcony, watching the sun set over the city. The sky was painted with hues of orange and pink, a breathtaking reminder that each day brought a new beginning. I took a deep breath, feeling a sense of peace settle over me. The solitude that had once felt so daunting now felt like a gift. I was free to redefine my life, to rediscover who I was outside of my marriage. And for the first time in a long time, I felt hopeful about the future. As I sat there, I realized that while the road ahead might be uncertain, I was ready to face it with an open heart and a resilient spirit. The past had shaped me, but it didn't define me. And with each passing day, I was becoming stronger, more confident, and more at peace with myself. With Polly out of my life, I found myself standing at a crossroads, unsure of what lay ahead, but determined to move forward. I threw myself into my work, channeling my energy into my sales career with a newfound intensity. The familiar rhythm of meetings and negotiations provided a sense of stability in the midst of the chaos that had consumed my personal life. One afternoon, I received a call from an old friend, Mark, whom I hadn't spoken to in years. His voice was warm and familiar, a welcome reminder of happier times. "Nathan, it's been too long," he said, his tone filled with genuine warmth. "How have you been?" I smiled, grateful for the chance to reconnect. "I've been navigating some rough waters, but I'm getting by. How about you?" Mark chuckled. Same old, same old. Listen, I was thinking we should catch up over dinner. What do you say?" I hesitated for a moment, the idea of socializing still feeling foreign after months of isolation. But something in Mark's voice urged me to say yes. "That sounds great, Mark. I'd love to." As I hung up the phone, I felt a flicker of excitement. Reconnecting with old friends was just what I needed to remind myself that life went on, even after heartbreak. The dinner with Mark turned out to be just the tonic I needed. Over plates of pasta and glasses of wine, we reminisced about our college days, laughing at old inside jokes and sharing stories of our adventures. "You seem different, Nathan," Mark said, his eyes studying me carefully. "In a good way." I shrugged, a faint smile playing at the corners of my lips. "I guess I've had a lot of time to reflect on things lately. It's been a journey, to say the least." Mark nodded, his expression sympathetic. "Well, whatever you're doing, it seems to be working. You look happier than I've seen you in years." His words warmed my heart, a reminder that despite the pain of the past, there was still joy to be found in the present. In the weeks that followed, I continued to reconnect with old friends and hobbies, finding solace and joy in the things I had neglected over the years. I started attending weekly painting classes, rediscovering a passion for art that I had long forgotten. The act of creating something beautiful with my own hands was therapeutic, a tangible reminder that I was capable of rebuilding my life from the ground up. One evening, as I put the finishing touches on a landscape painting, I felt a sense of pride wash over me. It wasn't perfect, but it was mine, a reflection of my journey towards self-discovery and healing. As I stepped back to admire my work, the doorbell rang, pulling me out of my reverie. I crossed the room and opened the door to find Susan standing on the other side, a smile lighting up her face. "Hey, Nathan. I was in the neighborhood and thought I'd drop by," she said, her eyes twinkling with mischief. "I brought wine." I laughed, stepping aside to let her in. "You know the way to my heart, Susan." As we settled onto the couch with glasses of wine in hand, Susan leaned back, her gaze thoughtful. "You seem different, Nathan. In a good way." I raised an eyebrow, a teasing smile playing at my lips. "Is that your way of saying I've been a mess lately?" Susan laughed, shaking her head. "No, not at all. It's just, you seem more at peace with yourself, like you found your footing again." Her words struck a chord, a reminder that despite the pain of the past, there was still hope for the future. I raised my glass in a silent toast, grateful for the friends who had stood by me through the darkest of times. As the evening wore on, we laughed and talked late into the night, the warmth of friendship chasing away the lingering shadows of loneliness. And as I drifted off to sleep that night, I felt a sense of contentment wash over me, a quiet reassurance that no matter what the future held, I was ready to face it head-on, armed with newfound strength and resilience. As weeks turned into months, I settled into a new routine, finding comfort and solace in the familiar rhythms of daily life. My apartment, once a stark reminder of loneliness, transformed into a haven, a place where I could reflect, heal, and rebuild. Each morning, I woke to the gentle glow of sunlight streaming through the curtains, a reminder that each day brought with it the promise of new beginnings. I brewed a fresh pot of coffee, savoring the rich aroma as I sat at the kitchen table, mapping out my plans for the day ahead. With each passing week, I found myself venturing out more, eager to explore the world beyond the confines of my apartment. I made new friends through painting classes and local meetups, finding solace in the shared camaraderie of kindred spirits. One evening, I found myself at a neighborhood bar, surrounded by laughter and music. I struck up a conversation with a woman named Emily, her smile warm and genuine. "So, what brings you here?" she asked, sipping her drink. I shrugged, a faint smile playing at the corners of my lips. "Just looking to meet new people, I guess. Trying to expand my horizons." Emily nodded, her eyes thoughtful. "I can relate. Sometimes, it's good to step outside your comfort zone." As we talked, I found myself drawn to Emily's easy charm and wit. There was a sense of familiarity between us, a shared understanding of the complexities of life and love. As the evening wore on, Emily invited me to join her for a walk along the riverfront, a chance to escape the hustle and bustle of the bar and enjoy the tranquility of the night. As we strolled along the riverbank, the soft glow of moonlight dancing on the water, Emily turned to me, her gaze searching. "You seem different, Nathan." "In a good way." I smiled, feeling a sense of gratitude wash over me. "I've been doing a lot of soul searching lately, trying to figure out who I am outside of my marriage." Emily nodded, her expression sympathetic. "I can relate. Sometimes it takes a major upheaval to make us realize what truly matters." Her words resonated with me, a reminder that even in the darkest of times, there was still hope for a brighter future. In the months that followed, I continued to build a new life for myself, one filled with purpose, passion, and possibility. I threw myself into my work, finding fulfillment in the challenges and opportunities that came my way. I pursued new hobbies and interests, exploring avenues of creativity and self-expression that I had long neglected. And as I navigated the world of casual dating, I remained cautious yet open to the possibility of love. The wounds from my marriage were still fresh, but I was healing, slowly but surely. Each day brought new lessons and discoveries, each setback a chance for growth and resilience. And as I looked towards the future, I felt a sense of optimism wash over me, a quiet confidence that no matter what challenges lay ahead, I was ready to face them head-on, armed with the strength and wisdom gained from my journey of self-discovery. One evening, while attending a work-related event, I found myself immersed in a sea of familiar faces and polite conversation. The atmosphere was lively, filled with the buzz of anticipation and camaraderie. As I mingled with the crowd, a familiar voice caught my attention, pulling me out of my thoughts. "Nathan." I turned to see Mrs. Perry standing before me, her expression a mix of surprise and relief. Her presence was unexpected, yet strangely comforting, a reminder that we were not alone in our struggles. "Mrs. Perry," I said, offering her a warm smile. "It's good to see you." She returned the smile, her eyes softening with gratitude. "Thank you, Nathan, for everything." We fell into step beside each other, the noise of the crowd fading into the background as we found a quiet corner to sit and talk. Over glasses of wine, Mrs. Perry shared her own experiences with the aftermath of the affair, her words a poignant reminder of the pain and confusion that lingered long after the dust had settled. "It's been difficult," she admitted, her voice tinged with sadness. "But seeing you tonight, knowing that I'm not alone in this, it helps." I nodded, empathizing with her struggles. "I know what you mean. It's been a long road, but we're getting through it." As we talked, I found myself opening up in ways I hadn't expected, sharing my own journey of healing and self-discovery. Mrs. Perry listened with genuine interest, offering words of encouragement and understanding. "It's strange," she mused, swirling her wine glass thoughtfully, "to think that something so painful could lead to connections like this." I nodded, feeling a sense of kinship with her. Sometimes, it's the darkest moments that bring us together. As the evening wore on, we continued to talk, finding solace and comfort in each other's company. It was a small but meaningful step towards closure for both of us, a reminder that even in the midst of pain and betrayal, there was still hope for healing and redemption. As we said our goodbyes later that evening, I felt a sense of gratitude wash over me. Mrs. Perry's unexpected presence had reminded me that I was not alone in my struggles, that there were others who understood and empathized with the pain I had endured. And as I made my way home, surrounded by the quiet hum of the city, I felt a renewed sense of hope stirring within me. The road ahead might still be uncertain, but I knew that I was not walking it alone. And with each passing day, I was one step closer to finding peace, closure, and ultimately, redemption. As I reflected on the tumultuous journey that had brought me to this moment, I couldn't help but feel a sense of gratitude for the trials and tribulations I had faced. Polly's betrayal had been a painful blow, shattering the illusion of the perfect marriage I had once believed in. But in its wake, I had discovered a strength and resilience I never knew I possessed. Sitting alone in my apartment, surrounded by the quiet hum of the city outside, I took stock of how far I had come. No longer defined by the pain of the past, I had forged a new identity, one rooted in self-discovery and growth. With each passing day, I found myself embracing the future with renewed optimism and determination. Gone were the days of dwelling on what could have been. Instead, I focused my energy on building a life filled with purpose and passion. One evening, as I sat at my desk, lost in thought, the phone rang, jolting me out of my reverie. I answered, expecting the usual barrage of telemarketing calls, but instead, I was greeted by the voice of an old friend. "Nathan, it's Mark," he said, his tone warm and familiar. "I was thinking we should catch up over dinner. What do you say?" I smiled, grateful for the chance to reconnect with someone who had been there for me through the darkest of times. "I'd love to, Mark. When were you thinking?" As we made plans to meet later that week, I couldn't help but feel a sense of anticipation building within me. The future was filled with endless possibilities, and I was eager to see where life would take me next. In the days that followed, I found myself embracing new opportunities with open arms, seizing each moment with a sense of purpose and determination. I reconnected with old friends, pursued new hobbies, and even dipped my toe back into the world of dating, albeit cautiously. One evening, as I sat across from Emily at a cozy cafe, the warmth of her smile filling me with a sense of peace, I realized that the journey I had embarked on had led me to this moment. A moment of clarity and contentment unlike any I had experienced before. "I never thought I'd find myself here," I admitted, my voice tinged with wonder. Emily reached across the table, her hand finding mine. Life has a funny way of leading us exactly where we need to be. And as I looked into her eyes, filled with hope and possibility, I knew that she was right. The road ahead might still be uncertain, but I was no longer afraid. For the first time in a long time, I felt truly alive, ready to embrace whatever the future had in store. And as I took Emily's hand in mine, I knew that I was exactly where I was meant to be.